She traveled alone to see the world, trusted someone for just one night, and never made it back. This is not fiction. This is the true story of Grace Millane.
Grace Millane was 22 years old when she set out on what was supposed to be the most exciting chapter of her young life. Born and raised in Essex, England, Grace grew up in a close, loving family. She was known for her warmth, her easy smile, and a natural ability to make people feel comfortable around her. Friends described her as confident yet gentle, adventurous but thoughtful. After graduating from university, Grace decided to do what many young people dream of doing: travel the world on her own. In late 2018, Grace arrived in New Zealand as part of a year-long overseas adventure. She wanted to explore new places, meet new people, and experience life beyond everything familiar. For Grace, this trip was about independence. She had worked hard, saved her money, and carefully planned her journey. Her family supported her decision, proud of her courage, and excited to follow her travels through photos and messages. New Zealand welcomed her with open landscapes, busy cities, and a reputation for safety. Grace documented her journey through social media, sharing images of beaches, city streets, and smiling selfies. To anyone watching from the outside, her life looked free and full of promise. She messaged her family regularly, updating them on where she was going next, what she had seen, and how much she was enjoying herself. In early December, Grace arrived in Auckland. The city was alive with lights and movement as summer approached. It was here that Grace planned to spend her birthday. On the evening before she turned 22, she went out to meet someone she had connected with through a dating app. It wasn't unusual. Grace was open, friendly, and used to meeting people while traveling. She believed in kindness and trust, values that had always guided her interactions. That night, Grace was seen entering the city with her date. Security cameras captured moments of them walking together, talking, laughing. There was nothing in those images to suggest danger. To Grace's family, this was just another ordinary evening in her travels, one they didn't even know about at the time. But the next day, Grace didn't respond to messages. At first, her family wasn't immediately alarmed. Grace was traveling, often busy, sometimes offline. Hours passed, then an entire day. When her birthday came and went with no call, no message, no social media activity, concern turned into fear. This silence was unlike her. Grace always checked in. Always. Her family contacted New Zealand police, reporting her missing. What began as a private worry quickly became a public case. Authorities retraced Grace's last known movements. CCTV footage was reviewed. Witnesses were questioned. Slowly, a timeline began to form, one that pointed back to the man she had met that night.
As the investigation unfolded, public attention grew. Media outlets shared Grace's photo, a bright young woman with a hopeful smile. People around the world followed the story, shocked that someone could disappear so suddenly in a place known for its safety. Vigils were held. Messages of support flooded in from strangers who felt connected to Grace's story, imagining their own daughters, sisters, or friends in her place. Behind the headlines, Grace's family waited in agony. They held on to hope, believing she would be found alive. Every update was watched closely, every rumor weighed heavily. The uncertainty was unbearable, yet they refused to give up. Police soon announced that Grace's disappearance was being treated as a homicide investigation. The man she had met was taken into custody. The shift from missing person to murder investigation marked a devastating turning point. Hope gave way to heartbreak. When the truth emerged, it shocked the world. Grace Millane had been killed by someone she had trusted, someone she had met only hours before. Her life full of plans, dreams, and love had been taken without mercy. But this was not the end of Grace's story. What followed would expose uncomfortable truths about violence, accountability, and how society views victims. Her case would spark international conversations about safety, trust, and justice for women. Grace would become more than a headline. She would become a voice, one that spoke even after being silenced. This was only the beginning of a story that would challenge a nation, test a legal system, and leave a permanent mark on the world.
As the investigation into Grace Millane's disappearance intensified, the focus narrowed quickly onto the man she had last been seen with, CCTV footage from Auckland painted a chilling picture not of violence, but of normalcy. Grace was captured walking through the city streets, entering an apartment building, and later riding an elevator with him. These ordinary moments became haunting because they were the final images of Grace alive. Police reconstructed the timeline carefully. They analyzed phone data, credit card activity, and surveillance cameras across the city. Grace's phone went silent shortly after that night. There were no outgoing messages, no calls, no activity on social media. In contrast, the man's digital trail continued uninterrupted, calculated, and deeply disturbing. While Grace's family waited desperately for answers, investigators uncovered evidence that suggested deliberate attempts to cover up the crime. The man had searched the internet for disturbing topics, including the disposal of a body. He rented tools. He traveled long distances. These actions revealed not panic, but planning. The case shifted firmly from a missing person inquiry to a murder investigation. When police announced that they believed Grace was dead, the news devastated her family and shocked the world. Her parents flew to New Zealand, holding on to each other as they faced the unimaginable reality of losing their daughter so far from home. They spoke publicly, asking for dignity, truth, and justice. Their strength moved millions. The accused was formally charged with murder. As details emerged in court, the narrative became even more painful. The defense claimed that Grace's death was accidental, the result of consensual activity gone wrong. This claim would become one of the most controversial and criticized aspects of the trial. Prosecutors presented evidence that contradicted the defense's version. Medical experts testified that Grace had died from strangulation, a slow, violent act that requires sustained pressure. This was not an accident. It was an intentional act, followed by conscious decisions to conceal the crime. The courtroom became a battleground not only for legal arguments, but for how society understands consent, violence, and victim blaming. Graphic details were discussed publicly. Grace's private life was dissected. Her character was questioned. For many watching, this felt like a second injustice, one inflicted after her death. Advocates and activists spoke out strongly. They criticized the way victims are often put on trial instead of perpetrators. Grace's family endured the process with dignity. Though the pain was visible, they listened as their daughter's final moments were described in cold, clinical language. Yet they remained composed, focused on one thing, the truth.
Outside the courtroom, public support for Grace grew stronger. People gathered with flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. Her face appeared on posters and news screens around the world. She became a symbol of a much larger issue: how easily trust can be exploited, and how vulnerable women can be, even in places considered safe. The trial lasted weeks. Each day brought new revelations, each one heavier than the last. The prosecution emphasized not just how Grace died, but what happened after. The deliberate actions taken to hide her body showed clear intent and awareness. This was crucial in dismantling the claim of accident. When the jury finally reached a verdict, the courtroom fell silent. The accused was found guilty of murder. Justice, at least in the legal sense, had been served. For Grace's family, the verdict brought a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that the truth had been acknowledged. Gratitude that accountability had been enforced. But also a deep, permanent grief. No sentence could bring Grace back. No punishment could undo what had been taken from them. The conviction sent a powerful message. Violence against women would not be excused, minimized, or disguised as misunderstanding. The case prompted legal discussions, media reforms, and broader conversations about how victims are treated in courtrooms and headlines. Grace Millane was no longer just a traveler who went missing. She became a catalyst for change, a reminder that justice must include respect, empathy, and responsibility. Yet even as the case concluded, one truth remained painfully clear: justice came too late for Grace. What followed would shape her legacy far beyond the courtroom, ensuring that her story would continue to be told not as a warning rooted in fear, but as a call for awareness, accountability, and change. After the verdict was delivered, the world moved forward, but for Grace Millane's family, time felt frozen. The court had spoken, and the man responsible for her death was sentenced to life in prison. Yet justice, even at its strongest, could not erase the emptiness left behind. Grace's parents returned home carrying a grief that would now define every day of their lives. In the months that followed, something unexpected happened. Grace's story refused to fade. Instead of becoming another forgotten headline, her name continued to surface in conversations about women's safety, consent, and accountability. Across New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and beyond, people began to question how society responds to violence against women and how the legal system treats victims after they are gone. One of the most important changes to come from Grace's case was legal reform. During the trial, intimate details of her private life had been publicly discussed in court. Many felt this was deeply unfair and harmful, not only to Grace's memory but to future victims. In response, New Zealand passed what became known as Grace's Law. This reform restricted the use of a victim's sexual history in court unless it was directly relevant, helping to protect victims from character attacks during trials. Grace's family played a vital role in this change. Despite their loss, they chose to speak out not in anger, but with clarity and purpose. They emphasized that Grace was more than the way she died. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a young woman who loved life. By sharing her story, they transformed personal tragedy into public awareness. Around the world, women saw themselves in Grace. Many recognized the familiar patterns: trust given too easily, danger hidden behind charm, and silence imposed by fear. Her story became a reminder that violence can happen anywhere to anyone and that no place is automatically safe simply because it is known to be peaceful. Media coverage began to shift as well. Journalists reflected on how cases like Grace's are reported. There was growing recognition that language matters, that the way stories are told can either support justice or contribute to harm. Grace's name became associated not only with tragedy, but with change. For her family, honoring Grace meant preserving her humanity. They shared her photos, her smile, her love for travel and creativity. They wanted the world to remember who she was before the headlines, before the courtrooms, before the grief. In doing so, they reclaimed her story from the crime itself. Grace Millane's legacy is not defined by the violence that ended her life, but by the impact her story had afterward. Laws were changed. Conversations were started. Awareness was raised. Her case forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about safety, consent, and responsibility. Justice, in Grace's story, did not arrive in time to save her, but it arrived in time to protect others. Her name now stands as a reminder that victims deserve dignity, that truth matters, and that silence should never be the final chapter. Grace went to New Zealand seeking freedom and adventure. She left behind a legacy that continues to demand a better world, one where trust is not exploited, where victims are believed, and where justice is not an exception, but a promise. Her voice was taken, but her story still speaks. And it always will.